Desperation at sea. Tens of thousands of people from the Middle East and Africa are risking their lives to cross the Mediterranean Sea to get to Europe. By Rebecca Zissou. It was early in the morning on April 17, 2015, and a 15-year-old Ali sat in an inflatable plastic boat in the Mediterranean Sea. It had been 3 months since he had climbed in the back of the pickup truck to leave his home in the African nation of Somalia. Desperate to escape the violence and poverty of his homeland, he had arranged for smugglers to take him 4,400 miles across the Sahara Desert to the coast of Libya. Now, crammed in a small boat with about 70 other migrants and refugees, he dreamed of starting a new life in Europe. But after a few hours at sea, a hole appeared in the front of the boat and air started leaking out. Some of the passengers tried frantically to cover the opening, while others used a satellite phone to call the Italian Coast Guard. It took 6 hours for help to arrive. Those 6 hours were the worst moments of my life, says Ali. I thought I would never live again. Luckily, everyone on board survived. Hours later, they were taken to a reception center for the migrants and refugees on the Italian island of Lampedusa. There they were given a hot meal, their first in months, and beds to sleep in. Ali and his fellow travelers represent just a fraction of the thousands of people who have attempted to cross the Mediterranean Sea to get to Europe in recent years. Many are escaping violence, poverty, or persecution in the Middle East and Africa. According to the United Nations, more than 100,000 people arrived in Europe by boat in the first half of 2015. Most, like Ali, are packed into rickety boats that were never meant for the high seas. The vessels often lack life jackets and navigation equipment. As of June, more than 1,800 people had drowned attempting the journey, up from 425 during the same period in 2014. The situation on the Mediterranean cannot continue like this, says European Union President Donald Tusk. We cannot accept that hundreds of people die when trying to cross the sea into Europe. Dangerous journeys. Throughout history, millions of people have been forced to flee their homelands, often to escape war, poverty, hunger, disease, persecution, or natural disasters. Today, the UN estimates that nearly 60 million people are displaced worldwide, more than at any time ever recorded. Many of those seeking safety in Europe come from Syria, a country in the Middle East being torn apart by civil war. Since the fighting began in 2011, more than 200,000 people have been killed, and 4 million have fled for their lives. Thousands of others are running from poor, unstable countries in Africa, including Eritrea, Gambia, and Sudan. In Somalia, where Ali was born, a violent militant group known as Al-Shabaab has been wreaking havoc for years. The group's aim to overthrow the country's Western-backed government and impose strict Islamic law. Al-Shabaab has kidnapped hundreds of children on their way to school and forced them to fight on the front lines. In my country, there is no peace, says Ali, whose parents died when he was 9 years old. In January, he decided that it was finally time to go. Ali left Somalia with a 19-year-old friend whose father had paid smugglers to take the two teens to Libya. As they traveled north through the Sahara Desert, where temperatures can reach 110 degrees Fahrenheit, they were given little food or water. Then one day, Ali's friend fell out of the back of the pickup truck and it sped through the sand. He didn't make it, says Ali. We buried him in the desert. A brutal stop. Weeks later, Ali arrived in Libya alone and afraid. There is virtually no security along the Mediterranean coast of this North African country, allowing human smugglers to operate freely. Connor Fortune of Amnesty International, an aid group, says smuggling networks in Libya often hold people for weeks at a time, until refugees are able to pay thousands of dollars to secure a spot on a boat. They promise that it'll be a very sturdy, seaworthy boat, he tells JS, but those often turn out to be false promises. Instead, hundreds of people are packed into small vessels made of wood or plastic. The smugglers often abandon the boats, says Fortune, leaving the passengers to fend for themselves. The boats don't have enough fuel to make it across, he says. They end up drifting on the high seas for days on end. Long road ahead. For the migrants and refugees who make it to Europe, the future is often unclear. Once they arrive on dry land, they're taken to reception centers near the Mediterranean coast, where they receive food, shelter, and medical attention. Some stay there for months while European officials decide their fates. Those who face the greatest dangers at home may be granted asylum, which allows them to stay in Europe permanently. Asylum is a protection given by a government to someone who has left their country to escape harm or persecution. But thousands of others are eventually sent back. Fortune says that European leaders are reluctant to accept newcomers. Some fear that welcoming foreigners will encourage others to try to get to Europe. Before we move on, the number of people applying for asylum in the 28 nations of the EU has doubled in the last 10 years. And here's what happens to the 630,000 people who applied for asylum. Either 43% got no decision, 29% had a decision, 28 were not granted it. In addition, some leaders are concerned about the effect that migrants and refugees could have on their local economies. They worry that natives will have to compete with their newcomers for new jobs. In recent months, governments and humanitarian groups and other organizations have to come together to find a solution. This spring, European officials started working on a plan to resettle about 60,000 migrants and refugees across the continent. They also agreed to increase funding for search and rescue operations in the Mediterranean. A global crisis. Millions of people worldwide are fleeing their homes to escape violence, poverty, or persecution. This map shows the estimated number of refugees by their country of origin. The 10 nations with the most refugees are numbered. And you'll see that here and on the next page. The problem isn't going away. But much more needs to be done, according to Fortune. He says world leaders should help build stable governments in the Middle East and Africa. That way, fewer people would seek safety abroad in the first place. Individuals can help, too, by raising awareness about the crisis. This isn't a problem that's going away, Fortune notes. For Ali, the dangerous journey has been worth it. He says he's grateful to have arrived safely in Italy and is looking forward to starting over. He hopes he's allowed to stay and continue his education and find a job. I'm looking for a better life, he says. I'd like to go to Norway. So, and then if we look at the map on the next couple of pages, we see where most of the migrants are coming from. Questions. Number 1, which of the two continents has the most refugees? Number 2, how many refugees are from Somalia? Number 3, which country in the Americas has the most refugees? Number 4, how many more refugees are from Syria than from Afghanistan? Number 5, which body of water separates Libya and Europe? Number 6, who is escaping from Myanmar? And that's right above here. Number 7, which countries in Africa have more than 500,000 refugees? Number 8, which country has about 3 times as many refugees as Eritrea? Number 9, why are people in Central and South America fleeing to the U.S.? And number 10, which is greater, the number of refugees from Syria and Afghanistan or the number of refugees from all the other top 10, numbers 3 through 10, combined?